Um, we're just going to take 2 steps to this project over here, which is the work of Peter Edwards, aka Casper Electronics, which is a name that you might have heard of in the scene. He's been exploring the field of circuit bending, experimental music electronics for quite a few years, and then dived into a new master at the Institute of Sonology in The Hague, which is a collaboration which I find very interesting with the Institute of Stijn in Amsterdam. Your background is actually in sculpture, right?
Yes.
And actually, before you did that master, you already set up a whole department on creative electronics at Hampshire College. You run your website, Casper Electronics, where you sell many of your interfaces. You perform all over the world. You give workshops all over the world. Did you really need this master?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a question of needing it. I mean, I wasn't really going for the paper. I mean, I think being an artist in the new millennium, we're in this really absurdly luxurious position of deciding. I like the crackling, it's nice.
By the way, are ice creams that Anna Mercedes is handing out.
The last show I played, I made everyone eat ice cream during it, so this is a nice continuation of that, yeah. Yeah, I think this is, from now on when I talk, I want everyone to be eating a popsicle. Could I get one of those popsicles? Is that possible?
Yeah, but you can't talk with your mouth full, so...
I won't. I'm just going to hold it.
So let's...
No, okay, but to finish off that thought, we're in a really luxurious position of being able to decide what the hell we want to do. I mean, everything, it's so arbitrary, and we can stack bricks on top of each other, or paint dogs, or draw ourselves inside out. We can do whatever the heck we want. And that's really daunting. So I wanted to go back and just say, what do I actually really want to do? And spend a few years focusing on that. Because when you're in the field and you're showing and you're working and you're selling, you're really driven by that because it has its own momentum and that takes you somewhere. And I wanted to stop and say, where do I really want to go? And luckily it's where I was, so hurrah.
And it seems that a collaboration between the Institute of Sonology in The Hague and the Institute of Stijn in Amsterdam is a perfect combination for you then. Yep. But what does this combination actually entail? Like how do they work together in this master?
So Stijn has been around for, 50 years, I think? I don't know the exact dates, but, and they really pioneered the combination of late-breaking technologies, most often with electronics, and the musical interface, so the physical musical interface. So not as much on the software end as on the hardware, and potentially the software as well. But the real focus in the end is on making music, on physically making music. And the Institute of Sonology is more focused on the science, the physics of electroacoustics and how sound works, with, again, some focus on actually making music at the end of the day. So the combination of the two is saying, let's make things, but let's also think about what we're making and then make something with what we're making, if that makes sense. So let's make the objects and the music and think about the science and philosophy behind it. So it's a nice trinity.
Yeah, I also find it interesting because V2 has good relationships with the both, but that's a different story. Let's dive into your projects here. Do you want to sit down or yeah, okay, yeah. Hold on to the ice cream. But before we demonstrate some of your interfaces, can you tell us a bit about the starting point or the more conceptual part of the work?
Yeah, so what I was writing about and researching over the 2 years was sort of the nature of electricity and how it functions as an organic phenomena. So not as much in how do we make TVs work or how do we make better radio communication, but what is this phenomena and how can it incorporate into my creative endeavors? And so there's a scientific research, but then also on the other side there's just completely personal. I like music. I like making music, so that's where it's grounded. So I'm doing a sort of scientific research, but within something that's completely about me and my own preference. So these instruments that I've been working on are about what I would call my thesis, collaborating with circuits. And that was really about being inspired by electricity and having it sort of affect your goals and then imposing your own goals on it as well, because we usually think about it as a tool. So this is something, these instruments are something that I'm collaborating with, not just controlling.
And can give us a bit of a sample?
Yeah, I mean, none of these...
A taster, Veronica would say.
Let's see. Woo! Sorry if that was my fault. So to call this music is a bit of an personal interpretation, but the way that this is behaving right now is in part due to what I've set the controls to do, and in part due to how electricity works. And what I'm utilizing mostly is a lot of different kinds of feedback networks, which I can explain one-on-one in more detail. But it's basically the natural behavior compounding with other other arms of the monster that the circuit has become. And I'm going to give, I guess, a more formal performance in a bit. And then I'm not really going to demo this one, but this is another project which is more focused on giving people tools to begin exploring the behavior of electricity and inventing their own instruments. So that's a big part of what I'm doing, is empowering people to enjoy the experience of invention.
Okay. And that was only one interface, right? That we heard.
Yeah,
but there's a few more, and there's also a screen there.
Well, yeah, there's also a screen. This is one that's been more of a personal development interface. So there's more to the story of this synthesizer. It's not only an instrument that has specific behavior, but it's also an interface that allows me to develop as I'm going, which is a really difficult thing as a designer, is to make something that is made and it's done and it's playable, but it can also expand. And that's a really tough idea to embody.
To leave it where it is, or?
No. Well, it's tough to leave it where it is, of course, which is why it's the other difficult challenge I'm facing is how do I make an instrument that can continue to expand. Okay. And then there's a light component, which I could talk a lot more about, but I won't. But I'll address it really briefly, which is that this circuit, as it makes sound, that's a modulation of electricity, of electrical levels. It's the flow of electrons. When those are applied to an LED, the LED lights up. So I'm taking that thing that is the sound, that is making sound when it goes to a speaker, I'm also making it make light. But through an interesting discovery, when you take this light and you put it into a digital camera, it introduces aliasing and all these other digital, it introduces, what's the word I'm looking for? Incremental, an external clock. Anyway, I won't explain aliasing, but you end up with this bizarre effect. So it's the natural behavior of analog electronics with the natural behavior of digital electronics gives you this unusual product that's coming out of the two of them. That's embodying discovery for me. So I'm making these instruments, and then I'm able to discover these new weird things that come out and determine if they're artistically useful, which over time I've determined that this is artistically useful. So there it is.
How do you determine that?
That's a good question. It's a really good question actually, because I think we can get really seduced by concept, and we can say, oh, this concept's really sexy and it's relevant and it's political or whatever it is. But what it really has to be is a physical thing that you experience over time. So eventually, as a practicing musician, you're not always engaging your thinking brain. Sometimes it's more the lower level where it's just automatic response. And over time that I've been performing with lights, I've found it to actually be a real integral part of my performance. And without it, it doesn't make as much sense. So it's worked its way in a way that can't be explained in a certain sense.
But I guess it also introduces a level of unpredictability in the system, right? The light in the camera sensor.
I mean, there's some intuitive things, there's some unintuitive things, there's some things we can't understand about it, but there is an inherent connection to the system, and it's based on an organic system. It's analog electronics is an organic. It's the embodiment of an organic phenomena. So there is something that we understand because it comes from the same place that we do, and that's where it gets more metaphysical. But it goes there in a lot of ways.
Is your goal much more this instrument and what comes out of it, or trying to understand what's happening in that system?
You have to do both. I mean, I think that I really advocate that people learn how electronics works, but also that they embrace what they don't understand about it. And that's a weird thing to do, but that's where I think you really get something wonderful.
Okay, we're going to hear what comes out of that later on as you're going to perform for us after we round up this round of presentations. Before that time, are there any urgent questions to Peter? Something you definitely want to know before he starts performing? No? Okay. Well, then I propose that we just continue our round and invite everyone back to your performance right after we wrap up the presentations. Yeah? And then if there's questions coming out of that, of course, they know where to reach you. Okay. Thank you, Peter.